Moving on to the AFC East, not the AFC East. We just did that. Moving on to the NFC East, we have the Dallas Cowboys with a C. Just a lackluster offseason. I know you got to repay your guys, but it's almost like I like their draft a lot more than their free agency period. And I think their draft brought their grade up to a C because I do like moving back for Tyler Guyton. Do I think they probably could have gotten Graham Barton and been a little bit happier? Yes, I do like the capital that they got. Marshawn Nealon, Cooper Beebe, Mars Lafu, like all good picks. And I think they had a very solid draft. But with the Dak Prescott extension coming up, I don't necessarily know what the move is here. And it was so funny because, Zeke Elliott re-signed and like those accounts that just post like just bullshit in the offseason to try to get clicks because there's nothing going on.
NFL shit posts?
Yeah, something like that. And they had Zeke highlights, and it was still when Washington was the Redskins. It was still, they were showing highlights when Zeke was playing them. But it's just like, it just goes to show, like, I mean, they really have done almost nothing this offseason.
No, yeah. I mean, dude, that's the thing is I think we have to start with the context. The context that makes it so dire is when Jerry Jones decided to verbalize that he was going all in. Like when again, Jerry Jones has had so many years to say that and he never did, and he chose now to say it. And now of all times, they have seemed and have been less aggressive than they've ever been essentially in his tenure. Really odd timing as far as that's concerned, right? But look, there's still a well-built roster, but it's kind of similar to what we were saying about a few other teams earlier, like the Bills. It's like, look, when you're one of the head honchos of your conference and you're fighting for the Lombardi, it's your due diligence and your duty to find ways to improve every year. I think we can agree, the Cowboys generally probably regressed after this last season. And it's like, when you're like you're saying, when you're going to have to pay Dak, and here's my thing too. Look, if Guyton ends up being the guy that we know he could be, then yeah, the draft, all that, we're going to look back and say it makes a lot. But on the other hand, if Guyton doesn't develop and he stays that same raw, not as well moving, right, and he's just that same tackle he was in college, all of a sudden, this Cowboys team is going to lose a lot of luster quick, especially when you got to pay Dak. You got to pay a lot of big names coming up soon. I mean, Zach Martin's getting older. Like, there's a lot of things that you're going to have to address sooner than later. And yeah, like, it's just, I don't know if they're in the best position as far as anything's concerned. Now we're in a situation too, minus Stephon Diggs, minus Deron Bland. Your third corner, your cornerback depth is not looking good. Like, they're not in the greatest situation. And especially compared to last year, it's like things are starting to, I don't want to say unravel, but you're losing some of the glue that you had holding the team together. And I don't know, to your point or anything, I don't know what direction they're going to go from here with that Dak re-signing.
But bro, they signed Eric Kendricks. They're fine. It's just like that. That's the. I just flipped my laptop. But the reality is, like, okay, you got to re-sign CeeDee Lamb. You got to re-sign Micah Parsons. You either have to give Dak an extension, draft a quarterback, trade for a quarterback, or run the Trey Lance experiment. And we've seen over and over again that this team, loaded a little bit more loaded last year, couldn't get it done. So, I mean, they'll never do it, but I almost feel like they just need to hit the reset button at this point.
Well, I was gonna say, it's a great point you just made there too. Remind me here, bro. I'm blanking. What was the draft capital that they gave up to get Trey Lance?
It was a fourth, I think. I think it was just a fourth.
Which is, again, for what the Cowboys are now lacking is actually relatively very solid capital. On top of that, I want to add, look, Trey Lance is still third on this team's depth chart. Like, that's not a good sign. If you're a Cowboys fan, that's not what you want to see. You don't want to see that Cooper Rush is still outperforming Trey every day when they're out there. Like, that's the last thing you want to see.
So I do like Mike McCarthy. Like I don't think he's a horrible coach. I don't necessarily think he was the guy to develop Trey Lance. I just don't. So my thing is, you just spent a fourth on him. Like what was the point? What was the point in
That's
that
what
deal?
no, that's what I'm saying. Because we're at a point now, realistically, where the writing's on the wall. They're very likely gonna extend Dak. So you spent a fourth round pick that you could have replaced one of the guys you just lost this year with. It was a terrible investment. Let's call it what it was, right? I mean,
Jerry Jones
I
is
can't
slipping
even.
fucking perks in his insurers in the morning.
He is. That's what I'm saying. Jerry, something's not right. Something has Jerry blanking every morning or something nowadays, bro. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it was they poured too many shots in the draft room. If I don't know if you were peeping, they were pouring the shot. I don't know what's going on, man. Jerry Jones is just starting to let loose a little bit, and Cowboys fans are starting to feel it because Jerry's just not locked in. They need Jerry to lock in. Jerry, you got to re-lock in for him, man. For the Cowboys Nation.
Yeah, Cowboys fans in the comments, let us know, is it perks or age that's fucking up Jerry Jones? Let's move in to the New York Giants because there's really not much else to talk about with the Cowboys. We gave them a C as well. So I do like that they reinforced the offensive line. Jermaine Elmanor, not bad. I do like that they went and got Brian Burns. Obviously, they didn't really have to give up much for his caliber of player, second and a fifth. I think they got fair value for him. And you have Thibodeau, you have Brian Burns, you have Dexter Lawrence, and then why am I blanking on somebody else? There's another person on that line.
You just Kayvon or Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence.
There's one more player, right? There's like a big player. But
no, I don't
no?
think for the Giants.
Okay, never mind then.
As long
Anyway,
as you said you I think you covered everyone.
Okay. Maybe I'm blanking. But anyway, what outside of this defensive line does this team have? I love the Tyler Nubin pick after losing Xavier McKinney to the Packers. I love the Malik Neighbors pick, but I do honestly believe that if Joe Alt was there at 6, they would have taken Alt. I do think that they were probably targeting an offensive lineman. I do like the Tyrone Tracy pick, Theo Johnson, especially with the idea that Darren Waller's probably not coming back and Devin Singletary is your number one back. I'm not trying to hate on dude, but I am kind of a hater of Devin Singletary. I just don't understand. He had one good year in Houston. Andrew Phillips, not a bad pick. But basically, all this to say, Drew Lock is probably going to be the starting quarterback. I don't know if that's true, but it just feels like that's the way it's headed because I don't know how much this regime can stomach Daniel Jones going forward. Like, he is obviously not the future, and this is kind of what we talked about last year, Dobbs. I remember we talked about the Giants, how they had that year, they made the playoffs, Daniel Jones won a playoff game, and then the next season we were like, yeah, I mean, they may be a little bit better, but their record will probably be the same or worse. And that's kind of what it feels like this year. Their record will probably be the same, maybe win a game or two better, but nothing moves the needle. I love Malik Neighbors, obviously gives them a type of player that they have not had in a long time. Let's not overlook that. But he doesn't look all that thrilled to be there.
Now, I was gonna say, like, let's address everything for what it is. Outside of Malik, the receiving core, and look, I'm a Darius Slayton truther to an extent, right? Like, Darius Slayton is kind of one of those guys that gets underrated. I'm not sitting here trying to, like, Darius Slayton, I'm gonna give him his praise. But outside of those two guys, the room is very, very short. And irregardless of all that, when you already don't have a really good receiving room, you need to at least have an O-line that's going to give your receivers more time to get open and come back to the ball. Well, let's call it for what it is. 4 spots on this Giants O-line right now are desperately in trouble because the reality situation is John Michael Schmitz finished last year as the lowest graded center in the league, and he had the worst pass block grade. His pass blocking on film was atrocious, right? Again, rookie year. Yeah, could he make a big leap this year? It's possible. But the leap he's going to have any type of impact on this team is going to be a leap so ginormous, I don't know if he's capable of it in one season. Especially when, you have Stinney on the left, Runyon on the right, Evan Neal outside of him. Minus Andrew Thomas, this line is it's desperate. It is dire. And then behind them, oh, who do they have? Daniel Jones or Drew Lock. Like, I don't think enough people are stating how dire of a situation it is on the offensive side of the ball. And then we'll move over. Look, I'll move over to the defensive side. Yeah, look, Dexter Lawrence is going to make up for a lot of the ills of this team. But to the left and right of him, we got Nunez Roches. And then on the other side of him, we got Jordan Phillips. And again, two guys have not played the best ball of their career, to put it as nicely as possible, over the last few seasons, right? They're really on the bottom end of the grading scale of the film has not been productive, right? Linebacking core, not, right.
That's
it could
what
be
I
worse.
was
With
thinking
Isaiah
of.
Simmons, Okereke.
Bobby Okereke. That's what I was thinking
Right,
of.
they
Not
got a
on the
good
line,
linebacking
though.
core.
Yeah.
But then we go to the corners. The cornerback room is also just in the nicest way possible. I'm just, I don't like to knock on guys, but the corner room is it's shaky to say the least. And then you lost your second best player on the entire team last year. You replaced him with a guy who could hopefully come to the same ceiling in Nubin, but Xavier McKinney was playing special football last year.
Like, McKinney and Nubin are just different players. Like, Xavier McKinney is a lot quicker, in my opinion. Nubin is a little bit of a bigger of a guy. It's just, I'm not saying he can't be what McKinney is, but you're just going to be getting a different type of player back there.
No, and I think let's put it like this too. Darren Waller is potentially retiring, and if he's not retiring, he's definitely not the same player he used to be. I know you replaced him with Theo Johnson, but as we know, Theo Johnson is one of those guys where the production on tape never matched the athletic profile. So if he ends up being that kind of guy in the league, you didn't necessarily address tight end the way you should have. It's just, there's a lot of ways that I'm going to look at this offseason for the Giants, and I'm going to say, how about this? The more that I'm even analyzing their offseason, I think we gave them a pretty generous grade. I think we actually gave them a pretty generous grade.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know how it could be higher, but I also struggle giving them lower. So with all that being said, we've got a C for the Giants. Moving into the Philadelphia Eagles, probably one of the best offseason grades we have. Well, we actually had a decent amount of A's, but the Philadelphia Eagles with an A. Getting Kenny Pickett for cheap, I think, is a good get. Saquon Barkley re-signing A.J. Brown, re-signing Devonta Smith. I think their draft was great. Getting Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, and then Will Shipley and Jeremiah Trotter, and adding Trevor Keegan to that already deep offensive line. And let's not forget about Johnny Wilson. Just adds a completely different type of receiver to that room. I really, really like what the Eagles did this offseason. Obviously, they also added Albert O. I don't know how you feel about him, but I think he's good tight end depth. I just don't know how you can not like what the Eagles did. And time again, my thing with the Eagles and the reason we continue to grade them so highly is because and we talk about it all the time, even in the You Don't Know Ball chat, these GMs overthink like shit. Like hell. They always overthink it. It's like the Eagles just make the easy, obvious decisions, and they continue to do it in this year's free agency class and draft class.
And then Howie Roseman gets gassed for it, and he's probably sitting there like, dude, what the fuck? I'm just not an idiot, but I appreciate all the support. No, jokes aside, I think really, the only thing that you could maybe say that I would have liked to see them attack a little bit more was really kind of going at that wide receiver 3 and really trying to get more of a, a guy that really complements A.J. Brown and Devontae Parker, and Devontae Smith a little bit more, because they went with Devontae Parker, who, again, I always will remind viewers, statistically, the worst separator in the league 3 seasons in a row. I'm not trying to harp on the man. It's actually a real statistic. But I think, so with that being said, I think Aeneas Smith is either going to take that role and run with it and just be that new slot number 1 for him, or I could very much also see Johnny Wilson finding a way to just be a big slot for them. And all of a sudden, we have a starting 3 receiver group of either A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Aeneas Smith, who really adds the element of quickness, that burst, that route running. And if not, Johnny Wilson, who's just we have a 6'3" monster and then a 6'7" guy right next to him, and then we got Devontae on the other side. I mean, really, no matter how you slice it,
You have
they addressed
Saquon
it
and
well enough.
Dallas Goedert. Like, their offense, we've seen Hurts has excelled whenever he has tons of weapons around him. And, people want to knock Hurts for that, but the reality is every quarterback should have tons of weapons around him. And if you want to be competitive, that's what you have to have. Their offense is stacked. It is stacked. Even with Jason Kelce retiring, like, their offensive line is still really good.
Oh, absolutely stacked. Cam Jurgens coming in. It's going to be, I mean, he's not going to be Jason Kelce, but I think he's going to fill the role just fine. This offensive line is still going to move really well. And then to add to your point, I'm changing what I'm going to say because this really made me realize that is why my final prediction is why that's why we're going to see Johnny Wilson win that big slot role and take that over. Because as far as what you can do in the run game, then having AJ Brown, Godare, and Johnny Wilson on the field at the same time. I mean, along with that O-line, you can just move anybody any way you want. And just with Saquon, I mean, it's going to get scary.
Yeah, I think Saquon may have one of his biggest seasons yet this year. So moving in to the Washington Commanders, we have them at a B. I'm not gonna lie, I think I understand. Obviously, when we grade the free agency class and we grade the draft class, the grades are exclusive to what they did strictly in free agency and strictly in the draft class. Now, when we can marry the two classes together to put together the final roster, I think that rounds out the grades a little bit better because I did not love the free agency class at the time, but I think it complements the draft class really, really well. The area that I think they really, really missed on is tackle. I think they are going to struggle really bad at tackle this year, and that's kind of one of the worst positions to struggle at when you have a rookie quarterback who you know is going to start immediately in a Jaden Daniels. The fact that they were able to get Jerzon Newton at their second-round pick, Mikey Sanders still to add to that cornerback room. Obviously, Forbes hasn't been everything that we'd hoped he'd be. And then Ben Sinnott at tight end. And even Luke McCaffrey, like I really like their draft class this year. They add Zach Ertz, who can be a safety blanket for Jaden Daniels. Overall, like I said, I didn't love their free agency class, but I think their draft class complements it as well as almost any of the two classes in the NFL this year.
No, 100%. I think, like, for starters, because I agree, I think here's the most important thing for Commanders fans to understand. Because this is really the bottom line as far as how things are going to go, specifically this season, right? If Brandon Coleman can come in and really overproduce where he was projected to go, and he can be that guy for you guys, because look, the reality is they spent their third round pick on their blind side, right? I mean, they said, hey man, hey Jaden, here's your blind side. It's our third round pick. Hopefully it works out well. And again, where Brandon Coleman was generally, kind of overdrafted to the consensus, a little bit of a surprise. Like if that ends up working out, and then on top of that, if Nick Allegretti can come in and play how he played in the Super Bowl for the Chiefs, and he can do that for you for 17 weeks, all of a sudden, truthfully, this line is starting to come together. But again, those are two contingencies that I have absolutely no clue if I can say for certain are going to happen. But that's the biggest thing is if those two guys can come together and actually be something productive for this team, all of a sudden I will admit, things are turning around. And if Jahan Dotson can make a big jump this year, the receiving core of Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and Luke McCaffrey, if Luke can be the player that I think a lot of people think he can be, knowing his pedigree and a lot of other things, look, I'm not saying and Ben Sinnott, like you touched on, one of my guys. I'm not going to sit here and say that they set Jaden up for failure. I mean, truthfully, Jaden's actually in relatively a pretty good position right now. I think what concerns me, and I think you'll agree most, I'll actually say what I think that they whiffed on most this offseason, where this is going to be their biggest issue far and away, in my opinion, bro, is that they did not decide to address the edge rusher situation by any capacity. And when you already have struggling young DBs, which is also another quintessential part of understanding Commanders' woes, and you got rid of your best DB from last season, right? All of a sudden, it's like, you're setting your DBs up for failure, and you're setting your edge rushers up for failure.
You signed a bunch of guys in free agency outside of Dorrance Armstrong that really don't move the needle, and then you take a late round swing on a guy as well. Obviously, you have, Newton, Payne, and Allen on the interior, but you hope Dan Quinn, being the guy that he can be as a defensive coordinator, as a head coach, like scheming up those guys for success, like you hope he can elevate them. Um, like I agree with you in terms of like they kind of missed out on that, but I don't think you can address everything in one offseason. I think your gripe with the edge is kind of my thing with the tackle situation. The reason I am so strong on the tackle situation is because you have this rookie QB and you really want him to succeed. And a bigger issue I have is the fact that like Jaden scrambles so often, even in clean pockets. Imagine if a pocket's closing on the left or right side and he's just scrambling more than he needs to be. So I'm going to be very interested to see how the Commanders' offense runs this year, because I will say he definitely has the wide receivers and tight ends to do it. Like he has enough in the pass catching department to get that area done. So overall, I think they've set up Jaden pretty well. I like I said, I just would like to see them. And you don't know what's going to happen when all these cuts happen and all these teams have to get down to their top, 53. So we could see some additions there, some veterans get cut, and yeah, overall decent offseason for the Commanders, who now have a franchise quarterback.
No, yeah, and I'll say before we
Go
move
ahead.
on to the next team, last thing for the Commanders fans, because I didn't think of it till you just planted the seed, but it's a great point you made. The reality is too, though. Look, Dan Quinn defenses that have become elite, which is basically almost everywhere he goes. Again, minus the Cowboys. The Cowboys is a completely different example. But right, the other two situations, he definitely never had any elite edge rushers around him, and he made it work just fine. This man had Dante Fowler touching 15 sacks. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, I'm gonna let Dan Quinn cook. Maybe he's about to do the same thing for Dorrance Armstrong here. I guess we're just gonna have to wait and see.
So overall, a decent offseason for the NFC East.